If a client is going to invest, they're obviously borrowing. The bank will want to have some sense of what the outputs are going to be to give them the money to work. So the client is going to want some certainty of outcome. They can't just go in with an open book unless it's, say, for a major infrastructural project. Could be Metro North, could be the Bus Connects corridors, where there's a huge amount of uncertainty of what's under the ground there. And you have to allow the contractor to cover their costs plus a margin for doing it.
Hi, Gavin Coyle back again with a fantastic guest. His name is Paul Sheridan, and he's the Director of Main Contracting Services. And so before we get into the conversation, I'm really looking forward to this, by the way. I've had a really insightful discovery call with this guy prior to this. This guy has a lot of pressure on his shoulders because he has to represent the interests of maybe two competing different mindsets. And it's his sort of blueprint to try and to get some sort of harmony between the public sector and then the master builder. So if you're in the construction game and you're saying to yourself, how do I get in and work with government contracts, and what do they look like, and are they attractive, and can I scale my business just on a government model? Well, this guy has all the insights on whether it's worth your while or whether the industry needs to change in order to make a positive impact for everybody so that everybody has equal equity in the game. His name is Paul Sheridan. Paul, I'm delighted to have you on I'm the Gaffer podcast.
Delighted to be invited on, Gavin. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to engage on what is a really important topic, I think, at this point in time in our country's economic and social progress. Like, the industry is critical to delivering for government across a range of areas, and I think the important thing is that now we engage the entire market. And you're right, it's not just the large main contractors. We also have a huge SME sector that could play a major part in delivering for the government. It's figuring out how do you engage them. I think if you start off with looking at some of the statistics, a recent survey of our own members, 50% of the industry doesn't do public works. Why? That's a serious figure. And when you go looking a bit further, it goes up to 72% for those who do none or very little. So the government's relying on a minority of the sector. And when you think about some of the really good contractors that have grown in Ireland, they've grown through exports and engaging with private clients that have taken them further afield. So what we want to do is switch them on. And to do that, like, there's a number of things that the government have to do. Like, they have to, one, look and understand the industry and how it operates, particularly when you get below the tier ones. 90% of the industry are made up of companies with 10 or less people. They're the SMEs. They're the subcontractors and small main contractors that can deliver a significant volume of work for the government. And they're the next big thing. They're the next Mercury. They're the next Sisk. You have to nurture them, and you have to realize that their nature, their business has to be given the opportunity to grow. And the only way you can do that is create sustainable profit margins through less administratively heavily processes to win work, to make sure that you're balancing the risk right. You're understanding that they're very focused on cash flow. Allow them to make money so that they can invest in their people, they can employ crafts people, increase the skill sets, try and innovate. And I think I know I'm reflecting what the CIS views are, but the European Union have just recently released a report basically saying the same thing, that EU procurement rules are not working. They haven't met their objectives. And the recommendations from the European Union's own report is that they must make the contracts more attractive and reduce the administrative burden on SMEs. And that's really important, I think, because it's important that you're backed up by a report from a state for the European Union as much as you are from what your members are telling you. So now is the chance to do that.
Well, is there an argument then that, when you have these conversations at government level, that maybe the right people are not in the room at that discussion when you're having that discussion with them, that maybe they're being influenced by, I don't know, some of these so-called management consulting companies that know better than everybody else and design models based on euphoric construction as opposed to what actually is happening on the ground?
I think you've seen a massive transformation in the industry, say, over 20 years, and some of that has been catalyzed or driven, accelerated by the introduction of the public works contract back in 2008, 2009, that kind of came in right at the property crash and the banking crisis. And that's what it was a banking and financial crisis that led to the property crash. But out of that, you had this combination of no work, very bad contracts designed to meet a political end, fixed price lump sum. That was a political concept. It's not a construction concept. Yes, you can have a fixed price lump sum contract for very small, well-defined projects. Great. But when you get into the stuff of building infrastructure for countries, it's much more complex. It's a risk management process. So then you had all that perception of within, I suppose, what you would call officialdom, official Ireland, that somehow contractors, construction contractors, were just bad, and they all were, and we all were bad. And then you threw out the baby with the bathwater when you brought in this public works contract, the first of its kind in the world. Nobody else uses it, and you can't even. It's not even defined in any legal basis. Each clause is open to interpretation. It's not legally defined. So you had that transition. So you had these guys on the ground trying to survive, trying to take on a contract which shifted a huge amount of risk. You had funders that were very, very now risk averse after lending, gratuitously and without risk management for many years. Suddenly now shifting too far to the right and no longer said, well, no, we don't want any risk. It's off our books. Give it all to the contractor. So the contractor's going into this environment and they're being told, you got to price this on the basis that you're only going to win it if you're lowest. So you're going in a highly competitive situation where there's no work and everybody's chasing the same work, and the only game in town is with public works. And so you had this self-fulfilling prophecy. You've got guys going in below bidding, trying to win work and trying to survive, and then the behaviours that come with that on site, with risk transfer and the whole contract anti-collaborative and the whole thing. So you had this just an effect where this view and perception formed that every contractor was out to get the government and we shouldn't let them make profits. And it's a very different industry to speculation and investors. We're talking about guys who actually build. You see the things coming out of the ground. That's what they do. That's what they're experts at. So all that then has led to major challenges around trying to explain now to the new officialdom. Because the old officialdom has moved on, but there's still muscle memory there. And what you're trying to tell them is that, look, you've got to learn how the industry works now. You've got to understand it. You got to know how the balance sheet of a construction contractor works and what attracts them to working with certain clients, and understanding the concept of how risk transfer is supposed to work, building information, designing things well, designing things to a level where they can be priced effectively, where risk is understood, where risk is profiling. Decide what do we actually really need from a small to medium enterprise in terms of information to decide whether we want them to tender. Think through these things. Don't be lazy. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to bring that. Now, there's a very good technical unit working within the government in the Office of Government Procurement, and they've been building up their resources over a number of years. But we've been calling on that for resource for many, many years, much faster, because they were treating construction like some parts of government that are ordering catering facilities and pens and paper. Like, this is a very much completely different industry. And in fairness, now the government are doing that, and they are trying to look at certain reforms, and things are happening. So I'm not going to knock on government and say they aren't doing something. They are, but it's taken a long time to change the perception, to get the doors to open again. And I think, what, it was probably a real catalyst was COVID. The industry really stepped up. They shut us down. We got back up as soon as possible. We've delivered the infrastructure that's currently underpinning the current house development, but we need to build more. It's the infrastructure that our members and the CIF and the small to medium have been building that supported FDI, and then the indigenous supply chains and their factories that go around that have all been supported by the Irish construction industry and SMEs. So we've done our part, and I think, but we're getting there. It's slow, and cultural shift takes time. Thinking, changing thoughts takes time.
I suppose the opening question to you is are you the voice of construction language at the government table, and your body, the CIF, the Construction Industry Federation? So without that, you kind of have to represent that language in a way that's understood from the politicians, to say, nice to have, nice to have, nice to have, must have. And I'm sure you have to pick your battles as regards what the must-haves are. And I'm sure you've got a framework of communication in terms of, well, look, if we can get this over the line in the short term, at least that will get us somewhere down the road of where we need to be. What is that? What is that in your opinion?
Well, I suppose first of all, I'd say yes, we are the voice of the industry, and yes, we are trying to inform government on how best to go about. But as an advocacy body, it is much as incumbent on us to understand the government when we're asking them to understand us. We have to do it too, and you have to have empathy for what's possible. Like the biggest challenge is managing expectations, not only of our members but from ourselves, but also what government can achieve. And you do have to go in with that open mindset that it's dialogue, it's explaining things, and it's very easy to stand up with a microphone on the media and start calling for things. But real business gets done by explaining what is wrong, why it's wrong, and what can be done to fix it within the artwork of what's possible. You know, a lot of people say we should be doing this, this, and this, but ultimately the conversation to boil down to what can we do and what should we do to get to the next level. And then when we get there, let's reassess and move again. So it's a constant, continuous improvement and continuous dialogue. It doesn't happen overnight. It just
Yeah,
simply
but
doesn't.
I suppose, where I'm digging at this conversation is we need a model, and obviously the current model or the previous model hasn't been working to a point of it allows. If you're telling me that most of your members don't want to work in the public sector, then the model is broke.
I would tend to agree that the model is not necessarily broke, but there are elements in it that could be tweaked to make it better. And we don't believe it'll take that much tweaking to make it better. It has, in fairness, there has been reforms to the current contract, but the PQQ process, that's the pre-qualification process, there has been a reduction in the administrative burden there. But that's some of it's still not enough for the smaller
The
people,
smaller
smaller
guy looks at
contractors.
this stuff and it says, "This
And
is
it's the
like, oh my
paperwork.
god."
Where am
Yeah,
I going to
and
get all
and
this?
some of it, I've seen some of the public tenders that come out, and you know that they're designed to stress test the capacity of the individual to a point where it might get 3 months into the tender, actually doing the tender, and then say, "Do you know what? I just can't be asked with this. Like, this is just too much hassle. I don't have the resources. The jobs are being backed up. You know, how do we fast track that process? Like, I know you're saying remove the administrative burden, but like, you can't be just handing out contracts either."
No, of course, there has to be checks and balances, and CF would never call for that. You have to make sure that a contractor capable of delivering the project gets selected. The thing is how do you select them based on um, logic and common sense? And the one thing you do is you select the criteria that are measurable. And what we've always been saying is, can you not create a profile for each contractor on the system? And it's there. So it's only then you're looking for what are you going to bring for additional experience, knowledge, and expertise for this particular project or a similar project, or what's your average turnover for 3 years? Not you need to have this for the last 3 years. Contractors ebb and flow with work. Sometimes you get a massive project. Sometimes they get five smaller ones, but they're still not as much turnover as the previous big one in the previous year. That's the industry. So it's a bit of common sense around there, and you kind of say, look, get this out of the way first, and then you only invite those who meet the qualification criteria to tender, which means you don't have guys throwing all this information in. And a lot of SMEs are forced through open tender processes where there's no pre-selection. And it means that they're having to provide all the administrative stuff. It's taken them a day to price the job, and it's taken them 6 weeks to gather the information. And now, as I may have mentioned in previous conversations with you, what we're seeing is more and more contracting authorities that might not necessarily understand the industry asking for crazy things like the financial information for domestic subcontractors that an SME might use. It, they won't know who they're going to appoint to do a 300,000 mech and elect job because the market's too flux. It is always in flux. That only happens at very, very large scale because the market gets tighter. There are only so many people available to do it. But the other thing as well, you get this other misunderstanding as well around standards and EU regulations like harmonized standards and CE marking. Like we're hearing contracting authorities for certain projects of that wouldn't be spectacular size infrastructure, looking for a bridge, for example, to have a CE mark. Now, like it's just some, that's not what the standards are for. So you have to kind of look at reality of, look, we got to get our SMEs attractive to delivering for the government, as much as we have to get the government to make it more attractive for our larger contractors to engage at scale. And what we're trying to do is to say, look, you make the contracts more collaborative. First of all, let's not have everybody diving into a claims process the first thing something goes wrong. Find a way to get the parties to engage and collaborate, and give some kind of authority to the EOR to make decisions on the ground. Give them more power to make decisions. You can't have this complete risk averse control at centre of government. There has to be, you have to allow a
Yeah,
contract to work.
there has to be
That's how building
flexibility in
works. It
it.
gets done.
Yeah,
Yeah, but we're not saying there's no checks and balances. You still have to prove that the costs are the costs. But let's find the cheapest solution and the most quality that will deliver the best quality. So it's a balance between quality and price. That's the first thing. And if you go as well for more quality in award based on non-subjective criteria, what you'll do is you'll take the heat out of the competition. And contractors will go, well, if I'm going to get awarded based on quality that is going to differentiate on a substantial level with the price, well, then I'm not going to go in so competitively. I'm going to price the job right. And there's this illusion that if you get 20 guys tendering for a project, that somehow that's a good thing.
that's the
It's a
worst
really
thing.
bad thing, because the likelihood is you're going to get well
Yeah,
below the price. You're going to end up in disputes. The contractor mightn't deliver because they might go bust. So you're not actually protecting your delivery, and that's the problem with with non-construction people running projects as clients. The risk is always yours. The risk is always yours.
is there a sense that you get that? I don't know if maybe this is just a personal bias in it, but is there a sense that, look, I'll just give it to the tier one guy because he can then manage all these little guys on my behalf, and I don't have to put up with the hassle. Therefore, I don't have to produce multiple contracts, and break up the different niches within a particular project. Do you know what I mean? Because like when you're talking SMEs, I would imagine that the best SME that's going to give the best result when you remove some of the red tape is the niche guys that are niching in not plumbing and heating, but maybe heat pumps, not building, but maybe drywall, but that does have a management expectation on it to try and coordinate all that together. So, is there anything you can talk around
Yeah,
in that regard?
you like what you see more and more is clients. They just want to work with
Yeah.
one main contract. That's it, one turnkey. The government got rid of the concept of nomination and appointing their specialists up front, and then in separate tender processes, and then appointing them then to the main contractor and working through that. They got rid of that, but they have come back a little bit with some are like name specialists and reserve specialists, and we've held on to nomination in new RAI form contract. But unfortunately, because of the crash, particularly, and because of funders and clients and investors shifting so much risk and the uncertainty within investment by government in the industry, you've got large main contracts now become more or less management companies. And what they do then is they rely on a huge ecosystem of a supply chain. And that supply chain are all subcontractors, and they're quite small, and they've gangs and skills and plant and stuff. And now you've got the main contractors coordinating all that stuff. But all the risk is flowing downwards. And you get so, like, in fairness, you have the Construction Contracts Act now that's there to protect SMEs in terms of payment, and we're working on trying to develop a low value one for disputes below say 50,000 to keep the cost down for them. So that is positive. But the thing is, as a client, how do you make sure that the industry is supporting itself, that those SMEs below the main contractor are getting the supports they need? And don't forget, you're right. There are also main contractors who will win work and appoint main contractors to carry out certain parts of it. And so problem is the further you're away from the
Yeah, the
client,
further away from the checkbook as well.
the more of your you get
Yeah.
commoditized. So it is a challenge for the industry in how to do that. And I suppose to change that, and for contractors to have a sense of, right, if I'm going to take the risk of investing in my people and grow my technology, grow my processing systems, bringing on different types of people, maybe looking at, well, maybe I will build up a craft section again, and maybe I'll just, that all depends on the government making sure it's got counter-cyclical investment, it's clear in its pipeline of work, it shows that it's trying to bring in more FDI, it's looking to build and support commercial office development, or it's looking to support residential units, whether it be apartments and houses, or whether it be um, student accommodation, education, schools, hospitals, private developments, and so forth. Like if you have that ecosystem and there's always some kind of a general flow, that creates certainty. That gives confidence. You have confidence, like any other business, whether it's Apple or whether it's Intel, if they have confidence, they manufacture. They have their supply chains. And then all that then helps support the sub-supply chains when you get down to your SMEs. And again, if you're awarding projects based on quality, well then it allows everybody in the food chain to get something out of that to invest. And if you've got a secure supply chain as a client, as a government who needs to deliver infrastructure for its people, it's now able to go to the market. So you asked the question there about, attracting, is it more in their interest to attract larger contractors? It all depends on the project. If it's a very complex project, they're probably going to look for larger contracts that have the experience and the size and the balance sheets to take that risk. If it's a less complex project, I think they are going to go for a main contract because they want the one-stop shop. But at the same time, it'll be a smaller main contractor and so forth. But the other big thing we don't talk about here, and this has a major impact in SMEs as well, is the design teams. The client has a major responsibility for having a clear scope, a brief to give to the design team on what they expect, and to make sure that they have a quality checks on what the design team are producing for them. Because a lot of them are pointing at design teams, but not really sure what they should expect from the design team. They're getting tenders based on lowest price. So even the designers are struggling 100%. To deliver quality. And if you're an SME,
by the time you find out.
Yeah. So you're going through an administrative process to try and get onto the tender. Then you're trying to price the job on the basis of a design that's given to you, but you're starting to realize that this isn't fully complete.
Yeah, or the design is obsolete by the time the tender goes to construction.
And then they're saying, no, halfway through, no, you're responsible for that design. And you're an SME kind of going, I built. I don't know how to manage a design team. And this is another thing that's really going to start. It's manifesting itself, particularly around public housing delivery. Well, let's do everything D&B because it makes the client's life easier. You're sitting there, guys, just design them properly. Appoint a good design team. Allow them to make good fees. Design it properly and then appoint your SMEs.
Yeah, and allow flexibility in the design process, because the design doesn't stop at the the planning stage. It should be carried right through as a dynamic process, like construction. They should be running parallel together, and there should be some sort of an allowance to say, nah, we don't think we'll go with that carpet. We'll go with wood. But hold on a minute, we have to go back to the drawing board. We didn't allow for this, didn't allow for that. Well, hold on a minute. The feasibility of doing this now and signing off on this has a far more economic benefit to everybody to get the job done, plus the fact it's going to be safer and it's going to be look better or whatever else. But it's...
Yeah, but you need, Gavin, you need flexibility in the design, but you also need at least as maximum amount of certainty on an employer design project as possible at the start to give the contractor a good opportunity to price in all the risk and what it's going to cost. And remember, the subcontractors could be tendering into the client as well, and they need to understand what they're pricing so that when the contractor takes on top ownership of their work, everybody's pretty sure of what they're priced and what they're doing. When you get into the D&B, it becomes even more flexible, and you need to make sure that when you're opting for that, it's usually when you don't really understand what the final outcome is going to be. You need a good contractor and supply chain to help you with it. And you're allowing them to bring their expertise to the table. You're not giving them planning drawings and saying you can't change anything, now work from that. Well, that's wrong. That's just shifting design risk. And that's the other thing as well, Gavin, that SMEs are really struggling with, and that's liability. And liability comes much, much more when you start getting to design. And then they're talking about, well, we want the use of BIM, and we want MMOC, and we want all these new technologies, but we're not taking any risk for this. It's all the risk of the specialist bringing it in. And you're saying, well, hold on a minute. We need to be upfront here and sit down and go, well, what is the risks of using this type of technology? And how is that piece of technology, which is new, and really there's only about 5 years experience with it, say, how does that interact with all the other components in the building? And how then can you hold a small SME that might have a turnover of 2 million, a balance sheet of 100 grand, responsible for a 50 million euro error? That's just bad economics. You can't insure for it, and the client is being deluded about how they're managing the risk.
I think that's a great point. But you're talking there, and I'm saying to myself, the default safe position for an SME builder will be, and let's agree on this, will always be, well, we'll just go day works. We'll just put on a day rate for the works. So I'm not going to get to a stage where I haven't allowed for this or haven't allowed for that. Is there any way of a conversation that could be had that there's some sort of a modelling on that in that sort of area that could be done rather than fixed price contracts?
Yeah, well, look, I think the concept of fixed price contracts from a public perspective has gone. You have price variation mechanism there now. Now it's not perfect, but they do accept that inflation is back. And we always said inflation was going to come back. Why take it out? If there's no inflation, you're never going to use it. Why take them out? So they're back. I think the lump sum is gone because things are remeasurable, and that's both on the private and the public side. So we're out of that kind of political concept, which has happened almost like by stealth, but it has to be welcomed. And that is a policy shift. But like in terms of, see, it all really boils down to the individual project itself. If you're say a small SME, say doing a €1 million retrofit of a house, they're going into an old house. They really don't know what's behind the walls, and you've got a good client and a good project manager has a sense of where they want to go with it, and they're saying, right, we're going to have to allow certain contingencies, provisional sums here for what we don't know. And we don't know there's a problem here. So we're allowing a certain amount of contingency, and you'll get paid for what you do. That's actual cost. Now, the NEC form of contract, it is not a panacea. It's a hard contract to work with because you got to use it every day. You can't put it in the drawer. But that does offer, certain payment mechanisms and certain structures within certain types of the NEC suite of contracts that contractors will actually get actual cost plus an overhead and margin. So the concept's not new. It just depends on the project and the type of expertise on it. So as a good client and a good design team and a good contract and a good supply chain to understand that thing. But you will always find that clients are always going to want some kind of certainty. And you have to live in that world too. We have to live in the real world. If a client is going to invest, they're obviously borrowing. The bank will want to have some sense of what the outputs are going to be to give them the money to work. So the client is going to want some certainty of outcome. They can't just go in with an open book unless it's, say, for a major infrastructural project. Could be Metro North, could be the Bus Connects corridors, where there's a huge amount of uncertainty what's under the ground there. And you have to allow the contractor to cover their costs plus a margin for doing it. You could open up and it could be, you would know, there could be old gas mains there that could take 5 weeks to remove or transfer, and that delays everything and so forth. So, and you'll probably find that, depending on how that project goes, there could be SMEs brought in to do the curbing. SMEs will be brought in to reinstate footpaths and reinstate driveways and knock down walls and move trees. And all these guys have to be attracted to that work. And, this is the thing, like, if you're asking me, it is critically important as an Irishman that Irish contractors are building Irish infrastructure. That's, I put the green flag on and you talk about what's really important to deliver our country. But they're also businessmen, and they also have a responsibility to not only the shareholders, but their own employees. Like, they're making sure that their employees go home safe, but they go home to their families with a salary. And they're very conscious of what happened 20 years ago. So, they're going to make sure that if they're making a choice about a contract and their future work and their future clients, they will want to work with ones that they know they get paid, they understand the job, and the risks are managed. And that's really important. And that's really where
Yeah, no,
contractors are going.
when you do, like, because our audience would also be the UK, Canada, and the States and Australia here on the podcast. Like, how do you get information in regards to other models in other countries, and are you using any sort of benchmarks in your own modeling within the CIF?
Yeah. Like, we've been calling for the use of alternative contracts for many years. The ones that have been used in the UK, Canada, America, I suppose what you call the old empire countries, right? But further afield as well. And the NEC is the one that's predominantly used across the board. You got FIDIC and you got JCTs. But most construction contracts are structured very similar. Some of the wording is more simple, but it's the nuances and how risk is managed in a certain different way, and how when certain things happen, contracts treat them slightly different. But we would look at those and say, why would the Irish government have its own contract when every government in the world is using one of the international forms? And the big difference is they're understood, Gavin. the NEC, the FIDIC, they are understood. The clauses are legally defined. They have had a judge make a decision on what they actually mean. So if you're ever in a dispute, you go, well, the clause actually means this because this is what this judge said. We have none of that jurisprudence on the public works contract. Nobody knows what the clauses actually really mean. So as one person described, and be a very influential person described the and for those in your international audience, rugby is the referee has a massive important role to play in an outcome of a rugby match, and rugby teams will study how each referee interprets the international rules of rugby. So you're going into a game and you're not really sure exactly what the rules of rugby are. It all depends on what the referee's interpretation is. So if you're actually going into a contract and an issue arises with your client, it's the same thing. You're actually going, well, what exactly does this clause mean? And if I'm going to have a dispute under it, what conciliator will I bring in to help us decide on the outcome of this dispute? So that's just uncertainty. And it causes problems and it delays things. It increases costs not only for the client but for the contractor. It reduces productivity on site and so forth. So I suppose yes is the answer. We are, but inconsistency in the public works contract is just a real problem.
There's no utopia or there's no one size fits all. Is what I'm getting from you. Do you know what I mean? You're trying to get a sort of a level playing field somewhere along the line, but you can't really put a proper framework on it.
It's like it's usually what happens is when you get theorists in rooms wanting to put a standard framework and wrap it around a complex thing. It doesn't work. So that's why the NEC and the JCT and they have different forms based on the complexity of the project involved and the type of arrangement that you have. And that means that the client is thinking, I want to build this. This is how I want to build it. This is why we're building it that way. This is how we're going to structure it. This is how I'm going to build the design. Now I'm ready to go to tender. Now I'm going to invite a contractor. And I have all my planning in place, of all my consents, of all this, and I know I'm going to have to start. That's a client that understands the importance of a partnership approach, a collaborative approach with their industry, and putting the effort and the time into the design phase and the planning phase of a project. What is the opposite of that is, well, we'll just throw everything at them and select the maximum risk transfer, put a load of Z clauses in the NEC, flip it onto the contractor, and sure, look, they won't know any better and they'll tender for it. Well, sorry, the world has shifted. There's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of industries and a lot of companies.
You're competing against the privates now.
The privates, and you're also competing with other countries. So the UK, they use the NEC generally. So they have to build infrastructure. Germany wants infrastructure. France wants infrastructure. They're providing different types of forms of contract. My members are going, well, actually, I'm going to have a better commercial opportunity there. I'm going to
do a data center in Belgium because these guys are paying me to do it's a better payday for me. And it's worth my while going to Belgium to do a data center rather than staying at home. And then, of course, she's bringing their workforce outside of the country of the jurisdiction of where they're residing into another country. And next thing, they're getting exposed to other companies, and other companies are going, Jesus, I like these Irish guys. I think I'll hold on to these guys.
And we're in demand. We're in demand. And I can give you examples of very large contractors. And I know we're looking at burden on SMEs, but this is an example. These would not have always been large multi-billion or hundreds of million euro turnover companies. But they've learned by working with international clients who've helped them, and they've attracted more clients, and they've learned and they've grown, and they will refuse to do public works contracts because it says it'll destroy the culture of their organization. Now that is a testament of the best builders in the country won't build for the government. Now what's wrong there? That's a problem, and that needs introspection. It needs introspection, and they should be doing it not because they're massively in need to get something delivered. They should take a pragmatic, common sense approach to the industry, understand it, and treat it like they would treat the agricultural sector, the food industry, the manufacturing, the FDI, the high-tech sector. We are a critical pillar of economic growth. If construction's not healthy, you ain't going to be able to grow your FDI sector, for example. It just won't happen. You won't be able to build all that infrastructure because you need a healthy, and you need as many Irish contractors building in Ireland as possible and being able to make a sustainable business model out of it. And the thing is, we are in demand. The members are in high demand because of our health, safety, the way we approach problems and problem solve. And the other thing that you have to dispel is this notion that the industry is not productive. What we have to do is do a productivity study on the construction part of a project. Separate the planning and the business concept that's done by the client, and particularly public clients, and the public spending code and the planning system in Ireland and the design.
Has its own issues.
Yeah. Now, what's the minute we get the site to the minute we get finished? What's the productivity there?
What does that look like?
What does that look like, and how is that delivering? And there's the other big concept of modern methods construction. The industry's been using off-site manufacturing for years. We've been doing wooden timber frames for years. We've been pulling in AHUs, pumping systems, prefabricated pipework, prefabricated steelworks, pods. We've been doing it for years. But they have this concept that MMOC is only related to housing if it's 3D volumetric. And that is not true. It's a huge amount of things. Solar panels, heat pumps, they're all built off-site and they're all assembled on-site and made to work as a system. But none of that works without, for example, the SME and the civil engineering contractor. There's probably, there's a huge amount of SMEs are civil engineering contractors. Those are the guys that put in the foundation that the house sits on. And whether it's volumetric, modular, or whatever it is, if it doesn't have water, if it doesn't have broadband, if it doesn't have sewage facilities, if it doesn't have access roads and so forth, it's not a home. It can't float. So, you have to think that what advantage is MMOC actually going to give you over the traditional build?
I'm sitting here as a politician now, and I'm going to throw a curveball at you, and I'm going to tell you probably something you've already heard already, that your members and the members that should be your members that are not your members don't collaborate in a way that gives us the trust that, we can bring this model into the future and this utopian model of all the boats will rise together. I don't see it because it's kind of a race to the bottom, and there's guys have their own set agendas and they don't really communicate or collaborate together in such a way that gives me the trust that, I can put together a model that covers the risk for everybody. Like, I'm sure you've had some sort of a conversation in that regard, because it's the truth.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, it's psychology. If I'm only going to behave the way you behave, right? So if you take the concept from high-tech manufacturing and FDI, you create the systems to drive the behaviors. Now, who's in charge of creating the system? The biggest client in the country is the government. They're the ones in charge to set the system in place to drive the right behaviors. They can pick clauses and contracts that can do that. They can strengthen the cooperation clause in the public works contract. They can drive negotiation before determination. They can use the NEC form of contract, early warning systems, pain gain shares. There are mechanisms there. There are incentives to do all that. And only that, you support leadership in the industry by educating your own people on how to use their own contracts and give them security and understanding of how they can actually get things done themselves through their own contracts. And they have exit behaviors. And you're right. It does then mean that the industry has to step up and respond to the system. Now, there are contracting authorities out there that do have very good collaborative behaviors and relationships, both with the client and with the contracting industry, and they get things done. We have to just look at our road network and how we build that. There's an awful lot of schools being built in this country that there's been no issues with. There's a lot of primary care centres that are built and there's no issues. So it can be done with the right clients, knowing, and both sides of the equation matching up. But a collaboration comes from both ends, but it starts with the client.
So where do you see your role over the next 12 to 24 months? Like, what's your key agenda yourself?
Well, for us, it's about highlighting the importance of getting the critical infrastructure built. And we have to see the outcome of the planning and development bill. That's going to be critical, but it's obviously the ability to combine in a balanced way public consultation on infrastructural projects, but at the same time the minister having the right for a critical project to step in and use their powers to get over the nuances of laws that make no material difference but are being used as ways of blocking things. We have to think bigger picture. It has to be about what's good for the common population, for the good of the country, and not necessarily the common good of one individual. That's critical. The next point for us then is making sure that the government continue to show us and tell us what their investment plans are. Get those counter-cyclical investment funds set up and secured. That'll give confidence. What projects are coming downstream? When are they coming down? What's it likely to be? How big are they? When are they going to hit the ground? That'll help with the planning system. keep investing in the design side of these projects. Don't turn off the design. You got to keep designing all these major infrastructure projects. They might not necessarily be going to site, but they're being building up a
Yeah.
portfolio. That helps to maintain that certainty.
Sustainable model.
And the next thing then is for us is we will be pushing hard. And the OGP have already indicated that they have a reform strategy going forward. We want to see that accelerated. The Housing Commission report has called for the reform of the Public Works contract. The EU report has called for the reform of the Public Works contract. We have set out what we think needs to be changed in the contract. And we're going to push that, but we're also surveying our members at the moment to get a really in-depth understanding of their view and what's happening contemporarily within the public contracting sector to support why we want those clauses and why we want those contracts done. So it really will be a case of working with government through the construction sector group, working with contracting authorities across the board, whether in the energy sector, in the utility sector, and working with OGP to try and successfully marry as best we can what will work both for the taxpayer and will make it attractive for contractors to do public works. That's really our focus.
Well done, Paul. Well said. And it's encouraging to hear that, to be honest with you. And I really wanted to get you on just to sort of speak to the small person, to let them know that, just because you're a small contractor doesn't mean there's great opportunities. Because my own personal experience working in public sector, when it's working well, it's a great place to work, actually, because, the people working in the public sector in the main are great people to work with. They're really, good, genuine, honest people that are just, trying to do the right thing themselves. And I think it's just the institutionalized block work that's causing the contention of not getting progress outside of the walls. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, it is. It's just open up. Let's just talk, and we'll build a dialogue, and over time we can create the relationship. And look, I always admire the high tech manufacturing sector. This concept called Six Sigma. It's not worth spending any more money than getting beyond Six Sigma. It just isn't. You have to accept that there's going to be the odd error. What we want to try and do in construction is say we're never going to make it perfect. There will be difficult projects, but you minimize the amount of them by being more collaborative, by encouraging better behaviours, by driving leadership, and managing risk effectively. That means spending time. Incentivizing behaviour. Incentivize the behaviour and reward it. Yeah. Reward good behaviour.
A few curved balls for you before we wrap up.
So a few more.
Your favourite holiday destination and why?
Favourite holiday destination up to last year was Portugal. And why has it changed? I think it used to be very great value for money. Right? And now I may as well be going out in Dublin with the sunshine.
Yeah, Lanzarote's the same. Myself and my wife were in Lanzarote. I was like, geez, Lanzarote's gone very expensive. Portugal's the same, is it?
Yeah. So we decided this year to take a punt on Malta and get a mixture of a kind of resort, but you can go see the old medieval parts of it as well and break up the.
Oh, cool!
Yeah. So hopefully that will be my new favorite destination if it all goes right.
Favorite book? Doesn't have to be business now. It could be fiction. It could be anything.
There's one book I always go back to. It's called Anti-Fragility by Nicholas Nassim Taleb. And it looks at, instead of focusing on trying to predict the future, it says focusing on trying being resilient to the shocks of the future. So you build systems that can actually benefit from a shock rather than trying to predict when it happens, because the world is uncertain. It's very unpredictable, and it really doesn't align with the best of our physical models of the world and economic models.
How much in sync is that book with what we've just talked about in terms of resilience and allowing for that sort of flexibility?
Flexibility of mind, yeah. And
go into the storm, but be prepared for the storm when it happens in such a way that you don't know which way the storm is going to come. It's going to come at some stage. It's just how you're going to turn it into a positive.
Yes, that's how do you adapt to it, and at the minimum, how do you resist it as best you can, and then learn from it. I think that's a growth mindset.
That's a great takeaway. When I even put that in the show notes, that book actually, a point, something about you that nobody would really know, or that your colleagues probably wouldn't be aware of, or that people wouldn't have, I'd never put that with him, or I'd never seen that as a connection, or something that maybe you've done in the past that nobody would. Now, you don't have to get into stuff that's going to convict you.
Convict me. No. I've always liked to. I suppose one thing that might run incongruous to people's understanding my personality is that I've often enjoyed poetry, writing poetry. Um, I don't do it all the time, but do you know, learning how to do it and writing it has actually helped me when it comes down to writing speeches or writing reports. You allow yourself to be a little bit for freer with your feelings in the writing, and it's easier for the reader then to enjoy it rather than as an engineer in the past it would have been a set
Yeah,
of bullet
yeah,
points,
yeah,
and
yeah.
there would have been full sentences and people would be reading it going, oh, I just can't. So maybe that's something people didn't realize.
Paul.
now on my way to San Francisco with
Yeah,
flowers in
yeah,
my hair.
yeah.
What do you see?
I hope you don't get ripped for this now. Anyway, but listen, Paul, you're an absolute gem in terms of really keep it going. Hopefully, things can turn the corner. We spoke about the fact that if Ireland doesn't do something in the construction sector in regards to public works in particular, that the first country to solve this will be the first country that actually achieves better productivity, a nicer community, more scale of economics within and prosperity within that country. And we're going to lose a lot of the brains if we don't solve it. So a lot on your shoulders, a lot on your on the Construction Industry Federation's shoulders to deal with that. If I am interested in getting in contact with your association with the federation, obviously you're representing Irish companies in Ireland. How do we get in contact with your federation, or how do we connect? How does a master builder or an SME builder connect with you guys?
Well, look, the best thing to do is the website, www.cif.ie. On the ribbon above, it'll showcase what we are, what we do, our services, associations, and you'll find an association that's right for you, and you'll have the key contacts literally listed under the headings. When you're down, there'll be pictures of us there. So I'm sure there's a picture of me there. I think it's more reflective of my hair growth at this stage. I think they got rid of the old one.
And
So, but like that's the place to go, and you'll get the contact number for the office as well.
yeah, and I'm sure there'll be people wanting to reach out to you personally as well, because you've talked a lot of good sense here in terms of, I'm sure it's resonated with people in other countries, not just Ireland. So you're obviously on LinkedIn, and I see you're strong on LinkedIn as well. So listen, Paul, I have to say, keep it going, and thank you so much for your time. And maybe we'll get you back on in the
Cheers.
future to see, did you make those changes?
Look forward to it. Give me about 18 months and hopefully there'll be a few more things to celebrate. We'll see. Listen, Gavin, it's been a pleasure, and thanks very much again for the opportunity.
Not at
Really
all.
appreciate
Not at
it.
all.